Maybe it seems like a deep dark night, but follow me outside into the moonlight.
Welcome to our final episode of Season 2 of Moonlight. The Wild Rose Moon series explores the talent that surrounds us all. Tonight, John Baylor interviews Dr. Cynthia Davis about her work as a poet, fiction writer, poetry editor, and her creative process. I'm Ryan Meir. Please join us as we venture off into the moonlight.
Welcome to Moonlight. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with Dr. Cynthia Davis, retired professor of writing and literature and poetry editor for Panoply Magazine, hypnotherapist as well, which I'm interested in talking to you a little bit about that part of your profession and its connection to your writing. She's been published in a variety of journals through the years, and we'll hear a little bit of works that were published in Ocean State Poems and Northeast Journal, but she's mostly coming to us as a fiction writer today. And in preparation for the interview, I'm mostly familiar with you as a poet rather than a fiction writer. But in preparation, she said, I want to talk about story. That's what I want to focus on, because not that you have anything against poetry. You seem like you're quite a champion of poetry, but you said that's what you were really interested in. So I guess I just want to start off with maybe a simple question of why story? What is it about story that makes you want to talk?
I'm not sure. I just love stories. I love to listen to people tell stories. I like to read stories. I like to write them. I find it fascinating to think about what a story can do for a person's thinking and feelings, sort of making a shape for your life in a way sometimes. I mean, in order to write a story, you have to see life as a story. And so I think that's pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost like you said in order to write a story, you have to see life as a story, but also to live a good life or a meaningful life, you see life as a story as well.
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of where you find meaning, I think. So, I mean, there's nothing really more natural, I think, to a human being than dance, music, art, poetry, story. That's just the most natural thing that I think children do. And I think it's the most natural thing that everyone does.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I got some little kids running around right now, and those are the things they get to them. I mean, they like to run around and pretend to mow the yard and that kind of thing too. But
sure.
But the love of stories just runs very, very deep.
Yeah.
And everything else stops when it's story time. That's the only thing that matters.
Wow. Yeah. That's good, because I think that's the most natural thing. When you hear a story, it begins to give some meaning, some shape, something extra happens then that doesn't happen when you're, eating dinner or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I grew up with my father telling stories at the dinner table. So I guess that was connected to food for me.
Yeah.
Sort of food for the body, food for the soul, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting distracted with your image of food as a story as being food, and I don't want to run away with it too much. But I mean something that nourishes you and helps you to grow.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, think about the word meaning, and you think about the word demeaning, and it's like when you demean something, you take the meaning away from it, and that's when you put it down or whatever. So it's a very powerful thing to create stories and give meaning, and shape and form and all that.
Yeah. Now, I wasn't planning on going this direction, but you were a literature teacher as well.
Right.
What I just want to ask, what's your approach to your students when you want to teach stories, when you want to teach literature? How do you want them to engage with that in an English classroom?
Well, I engage with it the same way as I engage with writing. It's like you have a question, right? We always start with a question. The question really is with a story. The question is, what would happen if? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
And your story is going to answer that question, okay? Or if you're going to write a paper, which I taught freshman English for a long time and read a lot of papers and a lot of wonderful stuff. And the paper will answer your question. So that's your essay question, that's your essay will answer your question. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the way you work. You put your question, I put my question in a big banner right up over my computer on the wall.
Yeah.
I keep looking at it. Am I answering this?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you say reading's the same thing. So in reading, you're answering a question as well?
Well, yeah, you look at what you're reading, and you're wanting to find out something. What do I want to find out? Here's a really neat thing. Charles Dickens wrote stories, novels in installments. That's the way it was done in his day. Okay, so people wanted, back then they were more patient than we are now, right? So every week he would put the next installment or the next chapter of the story on a ship, and they would send it out to the United States, right? Mm-hmm. Well, people would wait on the dock for that to be unloaded, so they would find out what had happened next. I mean, we want to know what's going to happen. What happened? You want to know, right? I mean, one time, the rest of that story is that one time when the chapter didn't get put on the boat, there was an absolute riot on the dock. People were so angry because they didn't get their next installment. I think the book was Little Dorrit, But anyway, it's a really cool story, and it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's like food again. I mean, if your food doesn't show up, you're going to be pretty angry about it.
That's true.
That's something that you need.
Exactly. And the first time I wrote a story, I was probably like 9 years old. I don't remember too much about it. But later, a couple of years later, I was in junior high. Now it's called middle school, but when I was in school, it was called junior high. And we were in study hall, and so I started writing stories, and I wrote them in installments, and I passed it around the class, right? Well, even the students that didn't like me, they wanted to know what happened. They would read it, and then they want to know, well, what happened, right? Keep writing. What happened? What happened? And, of course, I got in trouble for passing notes, so I stopped. But anyway.
Okay. Yeah, junior high and all these peers of yours want to read the next installment of the story that you're writing.
Yeah.
What's the effect of that? I mean, you'll go on to be a serious writer and literature teacher as an adult. What's the effect of having an audience that wants to hear what you are going to write next?
I think it just draws it out of you. Mm-hmm. The motivation becomes very high.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So.
Okay. I want to get into a story before we spend too much time chatting. So.
Well, I'm not going to read a whole story, but I'm going to.
Okay.
I just want to talk about for a minute how a story is written. You have to have your story question that but you have to get right into this day and age. You have to immediately get into the problem, because story is about how people respond to trouble. That's really what it's about, and that's why we're all engaged with it so directly. And I'll just add that I'd found out, I've read a stack of books on how to write novels, just that.
Yeah.
Okay. And certain things just grabbed me. And one thing that grabbed me was that your story is as strong as your evil character. Your most evil character, that's how strong your story is. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that kind of explains, a lot of what's going on in the news right now. All these stories about these kind of bad people, right? I would like to stop hearing these stories, but that's what people want to know about. That's what makes a strong story.
Right,
is your evil character. Okay, so anyway, people respond to trouble, and that's the story. It's kind of like, okay, you got a situation, you get a conflict, you get more conflict, you get even more, you get a crisis, and then you get a resolution. Mm-hmm. That's what I mean by having a form that gives it meaning. Okay. So these days you want it to come right in, you got to have that trouble come right out right now. Okay. And then you've got to have people that you can believe in, which means you have to have the ability to, just let your characters take you over. They just take you over. They boss you around. They tell you what to do. and they tell you what they're saying, and if you don't get it right, they don't like it. And it's tricky, it really is tricky. Here's the beginning of a story that I was writing sometime back. It's just a little bit, one page, okay. The phone on his desk was ringing as Henry Oldfather rushed into his office. He'd been outside looking at the rows of flowering crabapple saplings, their slender trunks wrapped in white tape to protect from destructive pests. Holding the phone away from his mouth, he shouted, "Hello, boss, Gus here." Henry paused a moment to catch his breath. "Yeah? Well, I guess I gotta tell you, there's a piece of trouble that you don't need." Gus tended to be negative. Henry waited, unworried. "What trouble, Gus?" "Well, I was out to lunch with my wife, and as it happened, I drove by the museum. That new head of the place, she's outside there with a shovel." Henry's neck began to prickle strangely. "A shovel? What doing with a shovel, Gus?" "Well, she's got 4 saplings in buckets. Looks darn well like she's digging holes to plant 'em. Black plastic buckets like we use sometimes, and her off-road 4-wheel drive sitting parked there on the grass nice as you please." "What? What?" His disbelief and sudden irritation was audible, even to himself. "Yeah, boss, she's out there planting trees. I called the wife. I couldn't believe my eyes. Not after you said we'd be taking 20 of our own trees over there tomorrow. I was planning on spending the day installing trees over there. The wife said I better call you. Thank the wife for me." So that's the opening. You can see. Yeah, here's a guy that's absolutely normally, perfectly, balanced mood, calm, quiet, understands his employees. He says, this Gus tended to be negative. Okay. And all of a sudden he's like, mad. So,
Yeah.
yeah. This was going to be a romance novel where, of course, Henry's going to fall in love with the woman that's planting the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. But, okay.
Well, you mentioned having a question, and when you're writing, you have a question. When you're reading, you have a question. And then in your introductory words, you narrowed that down a little bit, and you said it's about how we respond to trouble.
Right.
So, like,
yeah.
you, what if this happens? But
what would happen if, yeah.
But what would happen if, like, the what you finish that phrase with is going to be some kind of trouble?
Absolutely.
That comes afterward.
Uh-huh.
And then I guess you told us a little bit of the ending of the story because we won't be able to read the whole thing. We're just getting the
right.
intro page of
That's
it.
right.
But if the trouble comes along, then here in this story, you get to have some kind of reconciliation with it.
Always. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. A story's always with a resolution. I mean, if it's a tragic story, then there's death, but there's meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a good ending, a happy ending, then it's considered a comedy.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes they're mixed, so it's but that's pretty high level stuff. Tragic comedy is very high level stuff. I don't know how to write that.
Yeah. Well, you talked a little bit. I'll shift away from the story and then back over to your story, your life story.
Oh.
You mentioned your writing experience in junior high and writing these installments and everybody wanting to read those. Is that where you? Surely those aren't your first experiences with writing. Like, you're not going to share it with all your peers the first thing you write, or am I wrong about that? Where did it start for you?
Well, actually, that is where I started.
Yeah.
I guess I'd written some little thing before that I showed my dad, and he couldn't read my handwriting, so I had to read it to him.
Yeah.
And he was supportive at that time. Later on, he wasn't, because he wanted me to be a doctor, and every time that he thought he was going to talk me into go to medical school, I would get something published. And so he always complained about that, Every time I think I'm going to turn you into a doctor, then you get something published. So
yeah,
he didn't like that very
right.
well. So
well, how did you get this idea that you're gonna share your writing with all of your friends? That seems like a bold move for a little junior high school girl.
I really don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know how I decided to do that. I suppose I gave it to my friend, and she read it. She said, "Oh yeah." Somebody else said, "What are you doing?" And
yeah.
I don't remember the details like that. I just remember passing it around, and I remember watching it go from one, because of course I only had one copy, right? So I remember it going from one girl to another. Some guy wanted to read it, it would be like that. "Oh, what happened? What happened? Aren't you going to read the next thing? You know, what happened?" It's pretty motivating.
Around, did that make you nervous to like wonder, God, do they really like it? Are they thinking it's horrible or
I didn't have the slightest thought
really?
like that, and it didn't. I don't know. I was just absorbed in the writing, and I was like, okay. Even the kids that don't like me want to read it, so that's great. You know, no big deal. Well, I didn't have any ambition at that time about being a writer.
Yeah.
You know, I was just kind of doing what was natural.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, when you get ambitious, that's when you get nervous, right?
I think so.
Mhm.
I
When
really do.
When
Yeah.
you're trying to impress people, that's
I
when
think that's what happens.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So.
And you said you got in trouble for passing notes,
Oh yeah.
and so you quit writing those stories. So what did the next few years look like for you as a writer, through high school and maybe through college?
I didn't really do any writing. I didn't really try to do any writing at
Mhm.
all. I just, you know, I don't know. I was just always trying to make high grades because that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I read a really lovely story by a well-known writer who said that he grew up in a family, and it would be about the same time as my family, maybe even a little earlier than I grew up. And he said, he went on an archaeological dig when he was 15 years old, and he said one of the archaeologists on the dig, he asked him what kind of things he liked to do, and he said, do you like to do sports or whatever? No, I don't like to do sports. He said, I play the flute, I'm in drama club, and I try to do some writing. And he said, but I'm not very good at anything. And the archaeologist said to him, that's really interesting. Oh, he didn't think it was very interesting at all, because he said, well, I'm a failure. And he said, you're never a failure. He said, you do many things and you become an interesting person. And that's what set him off on the writing. And it was pretty remarkable, because his family had put so much pressure on him that, you had to be a success.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what really wrecks things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't play anymore. You have to be able to play, and you can't play, and not just your guitar, you have to be able to play in your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay. We're just opening up so many things, and I want to get a little bit more reading done.
Sure.
So if you could bring out another selection, but you've raised a lot of points that I think we'll come back around to.
Okay. This is a story I wrote entitled A Doll Business, and this is about a relationship between a mother and daughter. So, from her bedroom window on the second floor, the half-circle driveway sloping up toward the old fieldstone house looked the same as it had for 17 years that Laura had lived there. A blue station wagon parked close to the front door meant that her mother already had a customer. That wasn't unusual. They opened the shop early on weekends in the fall. She pulled on her... This isn't the right opening. You must have switched it.
Oh, did I flip them around? Some gremlin. Don't blame me.
I gotta have somebody to blame. Don't you know? This is the one that it's got to start much faster than this. Here it is.
Okay. Well, since we had that error, we'll go ahead and make use of it, because you did have two versions in there, and you had said to me before I started reading that you wanted to talk about opening quickly, getting into the conflict right away.
That's
and then I saw, wait a minute, there's an older version here, so let me just compare.
So they switched them on me.
We're gonna talk about
No,
this.
I'm
just a
kidding.
test.
I'm just kidding.
But then you made that comment yourself when you're putting those away. This one starts off much too slowly. Like it
That is
doesn't
true.
work. It
And
doesn't work unless you can get right into it.
That's true. You're right. And here's the opening. Laura came out of sleep as if she were making her way steadily up the rungs of a ladder. Yet being fully awake shocked her, as if something easily accommodated by night was intolerable by daylight. What was going on? She felt like she might panic. See, now already you're wondering, what happened? What's going on? And the conflict here is that she needs to find out what's happening. From her bedroom window on the second floor, the half-circle driveway sloping up to the old fieldstone house looked the same as it had for 17 years. And there was the blue station wagon, and then she gets dressed, and she looks for signs of abnormalities around the house. Everything's the same, but she doesn't feel right. So that's what we're going to find out in the story.
Mm-hmm.
What's happened that makes her feel like everything has changed. So, because that's what stories are about, is change, and that's
Yeah.
what human beings really don't like. But how do we deal with it, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What happens if this problem comes, if change
Exactly.
comes into our lives?
Exactly. What happens? Yes, that's right. So.
Okay, now I said you've been opening up a lot of different things that I want to talk to you about, and I
Yeah.
think we'll have a few more minutes to chat before we wrap up our first segment. So I wanted to ask you about this issue you mentioned very early on about the characters taking over when you're sitting down to write something. What does that mean that the characters are taking over?
Well, it's a little hard to explain, but it's called, but fiction writers, I'll talk about it, it's called character possession, and you just become the character. You become the character the character is talking through you, and you're kind of sensing and watching what this character is doing, you're listening. You just sort of become that character. It's something that scared me for a long time. And I was really afraid I'd sort of lose my mind, which could have happened, I guess. Maybe it did happen. I don't know.
You wouldn't know. Yeah.
Who knows, right?
What character are you playing now?
But that's what you have to do. You just have to let those characters sort of take over. You have to listen to what they're doing. You have to watch where they're going, what they're, and then you just let them boss you around. Sometimes when I hear characters saying, I realize later it's like, no, that wasn't Eileen. That had to have been Leona say that. That doesn't sound like Eileen, right? So I got it wrong.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can make those changes later. That's called revision.
Yeah, right. Well, you say it's a scary thing, and I'll just tie that again to something that you said earlier, that your story is as strong as the worst character, the most evil character.
That's right.
And if you're speaking on behalf of that character, like you're embodying that, or that's embodying you,
That's
or
true.
however you want to
Yeah.
say it. Like you got to put yourself in we'll say the better your story is, the darker the frame of mind you have to be able to put yourself in.
That's true. That's really quite true. I don't know how to go on about that. It's just scary,
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are just certain parts of myself that I don't like,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and I let those come out in the story.
Yeah.
I sort of give them a name. Okay, you're such a bitchy woman. Oh, your name is Roma. Okay, I got it. Like that.
Yeah.
A lot of it is about like that. Now, some of the evilness is beyond me, and I don't get into that. I just talk about it. Most writers don't really get into the criminal mind, but some do. Some actually do.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't do that. But I do have some pretty dark characters.
Yeah. But you say they're like they're parts of yourself. So
Well, some of the dark, not the super darkness.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm capable of like cold-blooded murder. I don't really think I am.
Mm-hmm.
Really don't think I am. No, I gotta check that out.
Good start.
Well,
definitely
I
don't
mentioned
think
that
you are.
just because. Oh, sorry. What's up?
You definitely don't think you are.
I definitely don't think I am.
Start with that.
Now, I mentioned that, or I raised that issue just because you said you're kind of embodying these darker parts of yourself.
Yeah.
Is there something beneficial in that? I asked that to say, like, is there something beneficial about sitting down and writing, period? But that part of the process where you embody those dark parts of yourself, is there something beneficial in that?
Oh, yeah, I think so. For one thing, I think it's really important to be conscious of all those things about yourself, because otherwise, they can kind of act out against other people. They can be hurtful, I think. But I can also have some compassion for other people who act like that,
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, I mean, in my novel, I have a character named Roma Cunningham, and she's very cunning. And I do like the Dickens type of names.
Yeah.
I'd like to name my characters like that. Not too obvious. I've had people say, no, that's just too much. But anyway, but she's really a terrible woman. I mean, I would never do things like she does, but I can imagine her doing them, you know.
Right.
You know, I mean, she's just real manipulative, and she's nasty. You know, she's backbiting, vicious gossip. You know, rich, of course. She's very rich.
Mm-hmm.
Wears all her diamond rings, you know, all the time. So,
Right.
Shows off. I mean, she's real narcissistic, you know, like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it also seems like when you're describing these characters taking over that you're sort of stepping out of the way at the same time. Like there may be things that you want to make happen and you just have to say, no, the characters are in charge of this right now. I've got to step away.
Very much so. Very, very, very much so. About the only time that I really step in to the situation, to the story, is if I have to describe something and I can see it, but I can't get them to like describe it. It's not in their voice to describe it, so I describe it. Yeah.
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 Is that difficult? Is that a temptation to say, like, I really want this to happen. My characters aren't doing this, but I want to get in there and fiddle with
yeah. It's a terrible, like, tension, you know, that goes on. Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely want to, you know, I was like, well, can't you get over it? That's what I want to say to my main character. She says, well, no.
Yeah. Well, people are like that, too, though. You say, can't you get over it? And no, they cannot.
No, I can't.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah, yeah.
What would be the problem with just stepping in and making them do what you want them to do?
I think it would just, I think that I might have nightmares. You know, they might just come to me in a nightmare and get really mad, or they might. The story would probably just hit a block.
Mm-hmm.
And that they just would go away, you know. And it's like, okay, you're not going to listen to me. I'm gone.
Yeah.
Like that. I'm out of here. Right.
That comment about having nightmares is very fascinating to me. Like you've told a lie, and now you have to carry that around with you unless you can set things right and listen to what the characters would actually do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It is honesty is really critical. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a kind of artistic, you know, integrity, or you know, you don't. Yeah, it would be a kind of lie. Yeah, if you don't say what those characters are telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah. True.
So maybe that means, just to summarize, like you can't finish the artwork because the characters are just leaving if you're not listening
it's like,
to
I'm
them.
out of here.
Right.
I don't like you anymore.
Yeah. So trying to impose your will on the work. A lot of times just means the work doesn't happen at all, like you've totally killed the thing.
That's basically it, yeah.
I think for some writers, you can finish the work, but it will just be that lie that you've now recorded and maybe published, and you've got like this propaganda piece.
That's
like,
exactly it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And not like I'm going to go ahead and say not like a legitimate child. You just have something that you force your will on that. I say that because you also mentioned parents earlier in our conversation, parents who try to impose their will on a child.
That's right. Yeah. And then the child has to live a kind of lie for a while. And the parents certainly do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the only real solution, and this is how my resolutions usually come in my stories, is that people have an honest conversation with each other. That's where I try to wind up. And they try to stop pretending, stop using the usual, you know, gummed together strips of words, as I think it was Rudyard Kipling that said that. Whatever. No, George Orwell. Anyway, just stop this kind of cant that people talk a lot, and just come from your own truth. And when people do that, then they overcome just anything, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to indulge myself in just one little image to go along with it.
Please.
Whenever this discussion of character possession comes up, I think of woodworking. like whether you're doing some small scale carving or whether you're like hewing logs and making a building out of it, you do what the wood tells you to do. Like if you have a block of wood and you try to impose your will on it, all you've done is ruin the block of wood.
Exactly.
Like maybe not if you're using power saws to do it, but if you're doing chisels and gouges and all that, like you do what the wood tells you to, or you've ruined it.
That's right.
And the same thing, even when there is no like physical material, you still have to follow the medium. You still have to follow those characters, or you just ruined your block of wood.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing about writing songs, because it's really, sometimes you can really have an idea for a song and then it just wants to go a different direction. You can ruin it. Sometimes I've not liked the song, the direction it took, but then other people are like, oh, that's great. It's like, oh, okay, I guess.
Exactly.
Although you created it, it's still.
Yeah, you don't
all
always
these three different forms of art we're talking about, they take on their own life, and
they take their
you just
own
have to
life,
kind of
Mm-hmm.
let it go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're not always right. You know, sometimes you're wrong about what's coming out. Right.
Strange, isn't it?
It is. It's a very strange way to. Yeah. Not a whole lot of what. It's your general wisdom that you read, in magazines and stuff. It just doesn't apply. It just doesn't apply. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you got to try to be happy. No. No, what about those times when I don't feel happy? Right, and who in me isn't feeling happy? Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and better not to tell the lie that you're happy when you're not.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to impose your bad moods or your dark feelings on someone else. You don't want to do that. But, if there's someone that you listen to them, they listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I said, that's how I resolve my stories, is people say their truth to each other.
Yeah, right. Well, I think we'll take a break shortly. If you would like, maybe we could have a poem. You brought a few of those along as well, and kind of close with that.
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay. This poem I wrote, and I wrote for Panoply Michiana, and I wanted to write something about, to try to give the sense of the suffering that has resulted from the pandemic. There was a painting of a crane on a sort of almost entirely white canvas with just a little bit of grass on the ground. And so I just wanted to write something as powerful as the suffering that we've been going through. Crane dancing in the dangerous place. Master, this is yours. This white, blank, empty, soundless nothing that befell us. Some of us did not die. The danger is we're afraid that all is lost nonetheless. Here is your space. After all, you are Lord of the Dance, are you not? Of course, there is a crane dancing in the dangerous place.
And I'll try to keep the discussion short. I'll just ask you one question. You open with, Master, this is yours, and this is referring to all this suffering that's flowing out of it. So what is that line, Master, this is yours? Well,
I'm trying to turn the pain over to a higher power, a master or Lord or whatever, Lord of the Dance or a creator. Yeah, I just was trying to create an openness that wasn't just a blank emptiness. I mean, there's a difference, obviously.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll be back. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes and continue the conversation. So thank you for everything so far, Cindy. I've very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Maybe it seems like a deep dark night, but follow me outside into the moonlight. me it seems like a deep dark night. But follow me outside into the moonlight.
Welcome to the second half of our final episode of Season 2 of Moonlight, the Wild Rose Moon series that explores the talent that surrounds us all. Tonight we'll continue our conversation with John Baylor as he interviews Dr. Cynthia Davis about her work as a poet, a fiction writer, a poetry editor, and her creative process. I'm Ryan Muir. Please join us as we go back into the moonlight.
And we're back with Dr. Cynthia Davis, and thank you again for joining us. Enjoyed the conversation first time around. During the break, we'll go ahead and have Cindy Boner get ready with a microphone. I'll say a few words before she asks her question. But during the break, our Cindy that's sitting here just walked over and just kept the conversation rolling and had lots to say. We saw the teacher at work over there.
Yeah.
And so we had a couple of questions from the audience, and I just want to start off with that.
Okay, the first question, when you said that the story can only be as strong as the evil character, my first thought was, well, then can you have a good story without an evil character? And then my next question, I can give you both of them, was it struck me when you were reading your little, the first part that you read about Henry and the crabapple trees, the scene was so clear in the way you described it. So I wanted to know how important scene descriptions are in relation to character development.
Okay. I'm going to take the second part first. Okay. Description is really a matter of how the writer sees things, and I like to describe things in a really visual way. My favorite, I'll just say this, because that's why you see that. You can see it so visually. That's just the way I like to do it, because I think that readers deserve to see, to see where the characters are. Okay, and so that's the way I like to do it. And I try to be very careful with the word choice so that the descriptions are really exact. Like the white tape wrapping the trees, the trunks of those little saplings, because I've seen that, and that's something that a writer needs to do all the time. I mean, a really professional writer or a writer that's a lot better than I am about it, more disciplined than I am is what I mean, would be taking a notebook everywhere and just writing down descriptions of stuff that you see. I should do that. Maybe I will. As far as and that connects, that's a good segue into the answer to the question, does the story have to have an evil character? No, it does not have to have an evil character. There are stories, there are novels that are written in which you don't have character development. A main character, there's usually a main character, but the character is pretty much a stock character, just a type, instead of an actual person. Actual people, in novels, that didn't come about until very late, only like late 17th, maybe 18th century. Before that, all the characters were pretty much just types, okay? But at that point, people started to see themselves as psychological beings, and so we began to develop, in our sort of our personalities and stuff. Learn lessons, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so if you have stock characters, the setting can be the most important thing in the book. And so if the setting is the most important thing, you don't have to have an evil character. You don't have to have the challenge to the main character, because that's what causes the person to personally grow and change. Does that make sense? Okay, so I could read you. I will read you. The opening to my favorite book, my favorite novel and novelist is Lawrence Durrell, and he was actually a travel writer also, and so he writes about settings. Okay, and his main character in the Alexandria Quartet is, even though the first book is, each one is entitled the name of the main character, Justine, it's still mostly about Alexandria, Egypt, and that's the main character. She doesn't change that much, but listen to this description. He's also a painter. All right, he's passed, but anyway. The sea is high again today with a thrilling flush of wind. In the midst of winter, you can feel the interventions of spring, a sky of hot, nude pearl until midday, crickets in sheltered places, and now the wind unpacking the Great Plains, ransacking the Great Plains. See, you want to know if there can be poetry and narrative? There it is. Okay, I have escaped to this island with a few books and the child, Melissa's child. I do not know why I use the word escape. The villagers say jokingly that only a sick man would choose such a remote place to rebuild. Well then, I have come here to heal myself, if you like to put it that way. At night, when the wind roars and the child sleeps quietly in its wooden cot by the echoing chimney piece, I light a lamp and limp about thinking of my friends, of Justine and Nessum, of Melissa and Balthazar. I return, link by link, along the iron chains of memory to the city which we inhabited so briefly together, the city which used us as its flora, precipitated us in its conflicts with which were hers and which we mistook for our own, beloved Alexandria. So there's description for you. There's no evil character. There's no conflict coming up. He's going to heal himself. So there's your, what if he goes back to an island and tries to heal himself? What would happen if he goes back link by link in the iron chains of memory? That's like, how could you ever forget a line like that, right?
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with the work,
Right,
and I don't know how much we want to spend your interview time talking about that. But if your main character is a city of Alexandria, does the whole thing come across as poetry more than story? Or
I
you
think
wanted to talk about the relationship between those two, so that might be a good place to start.
That's true. Yeah. I think it does come across more poetic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I can't see what he's writing about as well as I can see, the tape wrapped around the saplings. But I still feel something, I feel for him right away.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of compassion. He seems to be in a lot of pain. The speaker, right?
Right.
The one who's speaking, the narrator, yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, and then maybe this question shifts back over to your work, but we can step outside of that, and then I'll just ask, you have some interest in poetry, you have some interest in narrative,
I do.
and really wanted to focus on narrative, but where do those two things bleed together?
Well, as I like to joke, I let myself commit poetry like a couple times a year, and that puts me in the poetry jail, right? I commit poetry. I really think that when the emotion gets too great, you have to put it in a song. That's what I really think. When the emotion just gets so high, it's like opera, right? High romance can only be in opera, right? You know what I'm saying? Like Madame Butterfly or, Lucretia or whatever. So anyway, I think that these two things interact. I mean, I mean, sometimes I just feel a lot, and I need to put it in a poem, and it just isn't going to work in a story.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, why don't I read a poem that is kind of narrative?
Okay.
Okay. This is entitled To My Daughter Juliet. It's narrative in the sense that it moves through some time. It moves through time, so that narrative does move through time. Okay. To my daughter Juliet, the spring you were born came late. trees were still bare at the end of April. I was disappointed by bare branches. I had never cared before. It was your coming to me with your beautiful sapphire eyes that made me notice. I remember carrying you, bundled against that cold spring, refusing to let go, and looking for the green haze of new leaves pushing through bare branches. I had to wait an extra month for yellow to foam around the willows. I brushed my nose and lips across your soft head 1,000 times. Now 19 years have passed, and when I see you looking at me as if we are in love, I am frightened. It seems unnatural, yet why should I not love you so? When the terror and torture of your birth awakened all my seasons.
Thank you. Maybe rather than staying on topic of the conversation, I'll just go to what is it that chokes you up in that poem?
Love.
Mm-hmm.
I think love makes us cry, don't you think? Yeah. Cindy Boner, I know it makes you cry.
Hey,
I think of a line from Robert Frost, not from a poem, but he said, "No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader." And so you got work that speaks to you in a very powerful way. As I sat down and read that, you weren't standing there with me, but I can feel the emotion of this time in life just the same.
Yeah. This is well, my daughter and I have this incredible relationship. Like we sort of see through each other's eyes, and
Mm-hmm.
There's a great inspiration between us and stuff. And there's a lot of difficulty, too, of course. When you love someone that much and you disagree, it's about as painful as it can get, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
Now, it also feels to me like that's a poem that's very heavy in setting, in those physical descriptions. Although you said it was narrative, but to me, the narrative part of it is not really what strikes me about it.
Yeah, you're right. It is descriptive.
I wasn't trying to argue with you,
No,
just that.
no. I only said narrative because of the passage of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So, but that doesn't make narrative passage of time. It really doesn't. Well, you were saying early at the break, where a lot of people think that something is a narrative when it really isn't. It's a story when there's no story there, because
right.
it's just a character or there's an event, but there's not really a story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And just for the context, that's like people talk about country music as telling a story, and some of it does, but not very much of it.
Not as much as they think.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's telling a story even when it's not.
That's right, yeah. And I guess that tells you how much people want stories, and they really love stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Okay, I want to shift over a little bit. When I introduced you for the first segment, I said that you practice hypnotherapy, and I was hoping you could give us a very brief description of what that means, but I'm also interested in the connection that has to art, and maybe I'll set this up a little differently when we get there, but the healing nature of art.
Oh, yeah, that's a very beautiful idea. Yeah, and it's true. I mean, I think when Pam Blair was here, she said that some of her students said that writing poetry had saved their lives. I remember saying to a friend of mine when I was many years ago, when I was in college, I said to her, if you could tell the right story at the right time to a person, you could save their life. I believe that's the power of it. Really, is that it's so life affirming. And even tragedy is life-affirming because it gives meaning to a life. And so hypnotherapy is about being positive, really. It's about changing habits that are not good habits. And that's not just like overeating or smoking cigarettes or things that aren't good for you. It's also mental habits. We have mental thought patterns. And that those habits, we can also make those positive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very healing, and it's healing to the body as well as to the mind, because a lot of times there's trauma, And trauma is a story. Okay, there's always a story in trauma. See the connection there. And trauma is in memories, and memories get repressed, which years and years ago, before I ever heard of hypnotherapy, I always said, I've buried this in my body. And that's what that means. I always wonder, what do they mean by repressed? Where does it go when you repress it? It goes in the body. And so when you can release that, when you can get to that story and the person can understand what happened, it releases it, and it can release it actually from the body as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the other connection in addition to healing for me was that I just learned all I could ever hope to know about feelings and emotions from doing hypnotherapy and studying it,
Right.
practicing it. Yeah. So
It seems like there's an important idea in fiction writing circles, I guess you could say, that you have your character, and your character is driven by values, but is also driven by flaws. And to me, this seems like a sort of a new take on that idea. I don't know how old this idea is, but your character has flaws, but what you need to identify is like the wound that produced those flaws. That's part of the character as well, and that's part of the journey of healing. And that's that same thing. Like the character is working through trauma. The reason your tragic hero has these tragic flaws it is because it stems from some kind of trauma.
Absolutely. It's exactly the same thing. And that's what I do when I do hypnotherapy for people who, I do the regression work. I listen to the story. We get to the story, and that's the wound. I'm not going to get off on this hobby horse for too long, but and only John and I are English teachers here, so so the rest of you might not even be interested in this. But I've become very annoyed that the story of Oedipus Rex. They always. I was taught that he had this tragic flaw, that he had this overweening anger or something. The truth of the matter is, once I got into hypnotherapy, I realized that play was written as a sort of really to oppose child exposure, because Oedipus was exposed on a hillside to die, because there was a prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. And so they just took this baby at his birth, because there was this prophecy, and they put him out on a hillside to kill him. Why wouldn't he be mad?
Yeah, right.
Of course, what happened was the shepherd found him and raised him, and then he left and met his father on the road and killed his father and went to the city and found this woman and married her, and it turned out it was his mother. But it's like, I guess that's where people should not try to intrude or try to try to control things, right?
Yeah, impose your will on the situation.
Exactly.
Actually, that's very much a message in the story there.
Exactly.
But also, I mentioned it being a modern idea, this idea of the wound in the character, at least modern in how we talk about stories. Again, as far as I can tell. But yet,
well,
you can find it in very ancient stories, but there's like a
Greeks.
greater awareness of it
It's
now.
absolutely there, all through the Greeks. Yeah, they got it.
Right. And the Greek plays, the Greek tragedies, are part of what I had in mind when I said the healing purpose, and you said tragedy can be healing too.
Yes.
And I see those as very much stories where the community comes together and traumatized people are healed.
Yeah, and like the last line of Romeo and Juliet, where the prince of Verona says, "And because of you, I have lost a brace of kinsmen." He's so angry, at these people for their stupid feuding, and because of you, I have lost a brace of kinsmen. All are punished. All are punished. That puts everybody together in the same place. So there you are with the meaning, right? And bringing the meaning out of the tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did also want to draw something out of one other comment that you made. You were talking about trauma existing in the body, And that's something that you carry around with you. And that was in the context of saying art can save lives and poetry can save lives.
Yeah.
And Pam Blair wasn't the only one to mention that. I've had a couple of different people on the
Billy
program.
Billy Easton mentioned it too.
I think I feel like maybe I'm mixed up, but I feel like Matt Watroba made a very similar comment
think he did.
as well.
I believe he did.
And so I just tons of people make the same comment that art saves people's lives and poetry and music saves people's lives. And when you hear that, I think the most obvious way to interpret it is that, if somebody is suicidal, then it can kind of bring them back from the brink and help them see there's meaning and value in life, which is true. And that's the most obvious meaning for a reason, and that it does have that effect, or it can have that effect.
Certainly,
Not in rare circumstances, but rare circumstances do exist.
And they do. And I think that we don't get pushed to that crisis moment very often, or not very many of us. And that's why the reason is that we come to music concerts and we read stories and we, paint or whatever. That's what keeps us from there. I think John Kennedy said that when the Kennedy's Kitchen, performed here. He said, the reason that we didn't kill each other back in Ireland was because we had a violin. We sang, That's the only reason we didn't kill each other.
Yeah. And I was playing a program at a nursing home, and in the middle of my program, one lady said, I bet you're just happy all the time. You just always feel good, don't you? and it kind of struck me because no, I don't always feel good. I'm not always happy. And then when I had to stop playing music every day, then I looked back on it, it's like, maybe I actually was happy all the time. So even if it's not like saving you from killing yourself, it's still like constantly lifting you up.
That's right.
But actually the point I wanted to get around to was just that suicide isn't the only way that people lose their lives. And when you carry that trauma, you carry that stress. You're talking about like mental patterns that people have. Mental patterns do kill people.
They do.
And this is like a not particularly tragic example of it. I mean, there's a little tragedy in this, but you see like an elderly couple, one of them dies, and then a week later the other one dies as well.
True.
And it's not because their health was, like that they were both at the edge, but once the first one died, then the other one's in a mental pattern.
That's right.
That does lead to death.
That's true. They just want to be together.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I mean, in a sense, like I said, it's not like it's a terribly. There are more tragic things than that, but part of why I say that's, I want to be really careful because it's still a loss of a person, but I think there's also a sense of a completion of the story.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
Okay, we got another poem here, and before we
another poem. Okay, here we go.
Before we wrap everything up, I want to hear it too.
And I do want to make that shout out to WSNDFM. Okay. This poem is called Continuing Education, and it is written to the divine inspiration of the muse. And then you were telling me magnificences, that the steam coming from my tea kettle is not appreciably different from clouds, that even the great poets got it a little bit wrong, but go ahead and study them anyway. It can't hurt anything. That it's not calories that make me fat, but rather a question of where one's will is located, and that is related to time, because the will moves around, doesn't it? And then, as you force-fed me these ideas, as if I were a goose growing pâté de foie gras, I noticed that you have fine virtues, one of which is to scorn high-mindedness. And you said, we're so chummy, I like that. And then I asked you if you knew things like why we don't grow coffee in the United States. And you exploded. The world. You want to know about the world. We haven't even started on the world yet. And then wearily, I suppose you want to know what it's like to smoke pot, too. Until you dazzled me to sleep with lies and woke me without kisses. I've been reading your journal. Why did you take me down verbatim? Why didn't you turn me into a narrative? And then you left me in religious wonder, not knowing what to think, how to present you truly in all this shimmering. The muse is very strange and very diverse, if you will.
So we'll start with the end of that. You have this, the muse is the one that's saying, why did you take me down verbatim?
Right.
Why didn't you turn me into a narrative?
Right.
What's this all about? I mean,
Well,
we're dealing with questions of the creative process here, and that looks like a nice
Creative
end.
process, yeah. Well, I'm going to go this other direction.
Okay, yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable with talking about myself very much, or talking about how I create stuff and all this. And I'm uncomfortable with it because it just seems like a kind of ego trip to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't feel like that it's all that important.
Yeah.
What I feel like is that, I have to really respect my characters. I have to let them have their way, And I feel that involves a kind of a special kind of humility that it's important to do it that way. Plus, honestly, talking is really easy, and actually working is very hard.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I ran across this comment by Fran Leibowitz this morning on Facebook. She was talking to Ari Melber in an interview, and she said, writing is so hard. She said it's the hardest. There's only one job that's harder than writing, and that is being a coal miner. And I think that's true, I think being a coal miner is harder, but writing is really, really hard work. There was that sports writer many, many years ago, and this is a sports writer now. This isn't, a creative fiction writer or something. The sports writer, he said, writing is easy. You just sit down at the typewriter and open up a vein.
Yeah.
So it's really pretty hard work. So.
Well, and so in the poem, you also had this like condemnation of high-mindedness.
Right.
And so that, again, that's the muse speaking to the artist. Is that correct? Like,
exactly.
The arrogance of the artist.
That's true.
That's not the work of inspiration.
That is not the work of inspiration. That is right.
And so then you come in with this idea of humility as an artist. You're watching the characters. You're trying to get it all down. You're trying to get down the truth of their interactions and their motivations and all of that.
That's right. Yeah.
What does it mean? I mean, we covered a little bit of that, but what does it mean to be a humble artist, and what does that look like in the practice of making art?
Well, I'm not sure I know about that because I don't really pay too much attention to that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's more aware of the otherness, the story, the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Don't really pay that much attention to me.
Right.
And how I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can answer your
question.
question.
In a way, that's like the very answer to the question, because I'm asking, like, what is humility? And your answer is, I don't pay that much attention to myself.
That's true.
Okay. Got it.
True. Yeah. So.
Now, you did say you wanted to give a shout out, speaking of putting the spotlight on other people, not on yourself.
Yeah. I would like to give this shout out to WSND-FM, the radio station at Notre Dame. It's a classical music station. And I listen to this station quite a bit. And this past Sunday, I emailed a request to one of the hosts, Dick Nemi, who creates the Tuesday evening 1-hour show called Music for the New Century. It's music composed since the year 2000. I asked him if he might announce that the composer Talam is coming to the Wild Rose Moon on September 25th. I've never done anything like this before, and I didn't know what would happen. WSND-FM has never announced anything about the Wild Rose Moon before, to my knowledge. And to my total amazement and surprise and delight, I received an email the very next day in reply from the station coordinator, whose name is Pete Farrow. And he wrote me that he had already put the announcement about Talam on the schedule. Awesome. So we are on the schedule for the announcement of WSND-FM, and anybody who listens to Dick Nemi's program on Tuesday nights, it's the 1-hour program, is going to hear about Tullum coming here, and so that would be a really good select audience for that. In addition, this is really amazing. Mr. Farrow addressed me as Dr. Davis, even though I had not mentioned the doctor part in my email to him, because when I sometimes write in and say, I love this show, and I sign it Dr. Davis, but I didn't on this one, but he addressed me as Dr. Davis. And guess what? He wrote that he had listened to the Wild Rose Moon Radio Hour number 41, and he had heard me read poetry and enjoyed it very much.
That's great.
So this is a shout out to WSND-FM and Mr. Farrow if you're listening. Okay.
There's also there's a little bit of a shout out to Wild Rose Moon in that as well, or a service paid to this place. And you've been quite a servant to Wild Rose Moon for several years now. And I want to also ask you, what has this place and the mission of this place done for you?
It has done everything for me. I mean, I hadn't been writing for a long, long time. And when George Tricker opened the Wild Rose Moon, he really brought me in, wanted to find something for me to do, and wanted me to, he pushed and pushed for me to write, and made me into the teacher, I guess you call it. I'm in charge of the improv group, and that, of course, helps enormously in writing fiction, because in the improv, you're really exercising your imagination muscles very hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's helped a lot. In fact, improv is something that is recommended for people in all the writing, the fiction writing, articles. Take an improv class. And so, I mean, I'm writing now. I wrote some poems and some stories and stuff. I'm back to writing because of George Tricker. So yeah. I owe him, and I owe Wild Rose Moon all of that. So I'm very grateful.
And I guess I'll kind of ask you to justify writing itself, but why is that a good thing to get back into it? Why has that been good for you?
Because it makes me happy. I just love it. When I'm writing, when I'm in my world of my characters and my novel and whatever, I'm miserable. I'm miserable. I'm in a terrible fight with everything, and yet I just feel happy. It's a really interesting, strange kind of experience, but I really I just love it, and I really have to do it. And that's, I think, I know that's Ryan Meir is thinking the same thing. You just something you have to do, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
You just have to do it. I mean,
Yep.
it's not because. Oh, sometimes somebody says, couldn't you write a song to open Moonlight? And John does it. Or couldn't you write, if somebody asked you for something and then you were able to do it? Okay, that's fine. But then there are those, most of the time you just have to, right?
Oh, like whether you're sitting somewhere and you have a thought and I need a pen so I can write this down. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, so.
Needs to be out there, whether it's for you or for somebody else. You don't know yet, but you'll find out.
Yeah, and it's more like coming through you than it is you doing it. It's more like something else comes through you. That's why people talk about the muse and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned also that it's miserable when you're doing it, and yet it's joyful at the same time.
Yeah.
Which actually is kind of like what they would say about the Christian saint is like this combination of extreme misery and extreme joy that are existing
that's probably
all the time in the person.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
But also ties to this idea of tragedy as being something that's healing that we touched on earlier in the show.
That's
And again, I'll just relate it to music.
Sure.
I guess I'll give you any closing remarks if you want to make them. But just for me, this will be, I think, my last comment. That when the lady makes the comment that you must be happy all the time, I'm not only playing happy songs. Like, there's some things that I perform and it's painful to sing them, and yet the result of it is just this wonderful feeling.
Yeah, that's exactly the same. Yeah, exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, when you're writing it too, as well as when you're performing it. It can be just horrible. I spent many nights from like 1 a.m. till 4 a.m, trying to work out this, whatever it is, the timeline in my novel is just, it's a terrible thing. It's a mess.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know what's coming before what. I got to put this here. This one has to happen here because this happens after. That's cause and effect. See, that's what a story is. It's cause and effect. This happens and it causes this to happen and that causes this to happen, right? It's the chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in my novel, I have a whole bunch of different people's stories, and they're all kind of woven together. But does this happen before this or does it happen after? It has to. All these things that are happening at once. Help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who did this? Oh, it was me.
To me.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cindy, very much for joining us. I've enjoyed the conversation.
It's been a real pleasure.
Immensely. Just
I
really
have enjoyed it very much too. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Maybe it seems like a deep dark night, but follow me outside into the
Moonlight is made possible through the generosity of Gibson Insurance and the Gibson Foundation and Johnson & Danielson. Local viewers are invited to join us for the following in-person events. The first and third Mondays, Moonatics Comedy Improv with Cindy Davis, who is our guest tonight, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Every Tuesday, Songwriter Circle at 6 p.m., hosted by Ali Mangus. First and third Wednesdays, open mics with rotating hosts, 7 to 9 p.m., open to the public. Keep up to date with all our events on our Facebook page and our website, wildrosemoon.com, and Wild Rose Moon Media on YouTube. Have a great night.